If you were born in ancient Rome, your life expectancy at birth was roughly 21 years old.
Yeah, which is, I mean, it's a terrifying number to hear.
It really is. And you hear a statistic like that, and it's incredibly easy to assume that humans back then just, biologically expired by the time they hit their early 30s. But here's the catch. If you manage to survive the brutal gauntlet of childhood and you actually reached your fifth birthday, your life expectancy instantly doubled to 42.
Right. And if you made it past that, a surprising number of ancient citizens lived to see 60 or 70, even 80.
Exactly. Welcome to the deep dive. For you listening right now, whether you're trying to decode these big macro demographic trends, or maybe you're just intensely curious about how to maximize your own long-term well-being, our mission today is to explore the really profound evolution of human aging.
Yeah, we are going to compare how the ancient world viewed the aging process with the completely unprecedented global demographic shifts that are, happening at this very moment.
And perhaps most importantly, we're going to dissect how the lifestyle choices that you make today actually dictate your long-term health span. Because aging is not just this biological inevitability that happens to you. It's a highly malleable interplay of biology and environment and daily choices.
It really is.
So to guide this conversation, we are pulling from a pretty amazing source text. It's excerpts from the book Aging, a very short introduction by Nancy A. Pachana, along with some really fascinating demographic and medical data that she included in her work. So, okay, let's unpack this.
We really have to start by separating two concepts that are just constantly conflated in pop culture, and that is life expectancy versus maximum lifespan.
Right, they're not the same thing.
Not at all. Life expectancy is merely a statistical average, and in the ancient world, that average was drastically skewed by incredibly high infant and childhood mortality rates, along with death and childbirth.
So the math just gets dragged down. It's like looking at a classroom of students where half of them get a 0 on a test and the other half get a 100. The average score is a 50. But nobody actually got a 50.
That is a very apt comparison. The historical data from the text shows that roughly 6 to 8% of the ancient Greek and Roman populations actually reached the age of 60. So the biological machinery to sustain a long human life, it was fully functional millennia ago.
Yeah, the source material actually shares a brilliant historical anecdote about this. The ancient Greek playwright, Sophocles, he lived to be 90 years old.
Wow, yeah, 90.
Yeah, and when he was in his late 80s, his sons apparently tried to take him to court to have him declared mentally infirm. They were basically plotting to take early control of his estate.
An all too familiar family dispute playing out in ancient Athens.
Right. Some things never change. But to defend his own sanity, Sophocles didn't just, argue with the judge. He stood up in court and recited a massive, complex passage from a brand new play he was in the middle of writing.
Oh, Oedipus at Colonus, right?
Yes. Oedipus at Colonus. And he did it entirely from memory. He proved in real time that extreme old age did not guarantee cognitive collapse. And he won the case and kept his property.
I love that. And what that anecdote really illustrates is that reaching an advanced age with your faculties intact is not some modern invention. The capacity was always there in our DNA. What is entirely modern, though, is the sheer volume of humans who now get to experience it.
Oh, definitely.
Pachana's text includes this fascinating projection based on United Nations population data, and it tracks a massive global turning point occurring in our current era.
It's a crossover graph. Yes, I was looking at those UN projections earlier.
It's wild, right? If you trace the global population from 1950 and project it out to 2050, you track two specific lines. One is the percentage of children under the age of 5, and the other is the percentage of people over the age of 65. Throughout all of recorded human history, the line for young children has just towered over the older demographic. But right now, those lines are crossing. We are entering an era where there will be more people on Earth over 65 than children under 5.
Visually, this is the shift from the historical population pyramid to the modern population rectangle.
Exactly, the population rectangle.
Because in the past, you had this massive, wide base of young people, and as you moved up the age brackets, mortality took its toll. So it narrowed the triangle to a tiny, sharp point at the top. But this modern data shows the numbers balancing out, becoming a rectangle, because the vast majority of people born today will actually survive to the top of the chart.
And what's fascinating here is that we achieve this without magic. Throughout history, humanity has obsessed over extreme mythical longevity. We had these antediluvian myths of figures like Methuselah living over 900 years.
Or the frantic, globe-spanning searches for a fountain of youth?
Right. But the irony is that our modern population rectangle wasn't built on a mythical elixir. It was built on sanitation, the germ theory of disease, modern pharmacology, and stable food supplies.
So, if the hardware of the human machine has always had the capacity to run for 80 or 90 years, and public health has successfully cleared the early hazards out of the way, the question naturally shifts from, well, will I live? To how well will I live?
Exactly. And this moves us from macro-level demographic statistics down to the cellular biology of choice.
It's fascinating that ancient thinkers were already laying the groundwork for this distinction. Like the Greek physician Galen, he warned his contemporaries to focus on preventing illness through nutrition and movement rather than just trying to treat sickness after the fact.
Yeah, prevention over cure.
And Cicero, the Roman philosopher, he bluntly noted that an immoderate youth hands on a worn-out body to old age.
Cicero was describing what modern gerontology classifies as the critical difference between primary aging and secondary aging.
Okay, let's break that down.
Sure. So primary aging is the universal, unavoidable wear and tear of biological time.
Like the lens of your eye naturally losing flexibility, so you inevitably need reading glasses in your 40s. You can't out-exercise or out-diet a rigid lens.
Right, exactly. That is primary aging at work. But secondary aging is the accumulation of disease, physical damage, and functional decline that is driven largely by lifestyle choices and environmental exposures.
Like what?
Think of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, or specific forms of dementia. These are very common, but they are not universal biological inevitabilities.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If we look at this through a mechanical lens, primary aging is the baseline mileage on a car. No matter how perfectly you drive, belts degrade and parts wear out simply from the passage of time.
Yeah, just physics.
Right. But secondary aging is the damage from the way you drive. It's, slamming into potholes, driving on salted roads without washing the undercarriage, or ignoring the check engine light for like 5 years.
That's a great way to put it. And to quantify that pothole damage, public health officials use a metric called dead daily, which stands for disability adjusted life year.
Think of dailies as an invoice for your lifestyle.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, because every year you live with severe metabolic syndrome or a loss of mobility from just neglecting your physical health, you are paying a tax. Public health data doesn't just record when you die. It actually calculates how many years of functional freedom you lost before you died.
Which is such a crucial distinction.
It is. The entire goal of gerontology today isn't just extending your lifespan, it's maximizing your health span to shrink that daily invoice.
And to reduce those dailies, the source material focuses on the cellular mechanisms behind specific lifestyle choices. Caloric restriction is a really prime example.
Okay, I want to dig into that.
Well, in animal models, drastically reducing caloric intake consistently increases maximum lifespan and delays age-related diseases.
But what is the actual mechanism making caloric restriction work? Because, starving yourself doesn't intuitively sound like a recipe for a longer life.
It doesn't, no. But it comes down to cellular metabolism and stress. When you consume high amounts of calories constantly, your cells are perpetually in a growth and processing mode. They're just busy handling this massive influx of energy.
Okay.
But when calories are restricted, or when the body experiences periods of fasting, the cells experience mild metabolic stress. And this triggers them to switch from growth mode to repair mode.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they start actively cleaning up accumulated cellular garbage, repairing damaged proteins, and basically prioritizing efficiency over expansion.
So it's not about malnourishment. It's about giving the biological factory a break so the janitorial staff can come in and actually clean the machinery.
Exactly, and this plays directly into the genetic theory of aging mentioned in the text, specifically regarding telomeres.
Yes, telomeres.
Telomeres are essential to understanding the cellular clock. Your DNA is tightly bundled into chromosomes, and at the end of every chromosome is a telomere. They function identically to the little plastic caps at the ends of your shoelaces.
The aglets.
Yes, the aglets. Their biological purpose is to prevent the DNA strands from fraying or tangling with other chromosomes. But here is the mechanism of aging. Every single time a cell divides to replace an old or damaged cell, that telomere gets a tiny bit shorter.
Like wearing down a pencil eraser.
Right. And eventually the telomere cap becomes too short to protect the DNA. The cell senses this danger, stops dividing, and becomes senescent. It essentially retires or dies.
So that telomere shortening is the primary aging, the baseline mileage we talked about?
Exactly. But secondary aging accelerates that shortening. Severe psychological stress, poor diet, smoking, and high inflammation actively degrade those telomere caps way faster than normal.
Wow.
But on the flip side, we have an enzyme in our bodies called telomerase, which can actually add length back to the telomeres.
Wait, it can rebuild them?
It can. And the behaviors that promote telomerase activity are intense physical exercise, a Mediterranean-style diet rich in antioxidants, and active stress management.
So my daily habits aren't just like broadly good for my heart. A Mediterranean diet swapping out saturated fats for olive oil or going for a strenuous run is literally signaling an enzyme to rebuild the plastic caps on my DNA.
It is literally doing that, yes.
It puts a profound amount of pressure on what I decide to eat for lunch today.
It really does. But, while protecting the physical machinery of the body is crucial, long-term well-being relies just as heavily on the mind.
Right.
The historical assumption was that the brain simply underwent passive decline, just losing neurons year after year until cognitive failure.
Yeah.
But we now understand that the adult brain is highly dynamic and plastic.
Yeah, the source highlights the concept of cognitive reserve, and it uses that famous study of London taxi drivers to explain it.
Oh, that's a classic study.
It's so cool. So to get a taxi license in London, drivers have to memorize the knowledge, which is this mind-bending labyrinth of thousands of city streets and landmarks.
And when researchers scanned the brains of these seasoned drivers, they found that their hippocampi, which is a region deeply involved in spatial memory and navigation, had physically enlarged compared to the general population.
The brain literally grew new tissue to accommodate the demand.
It proves that challenging the brain alters its physical structure. You build a reserve. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this brings us to a prominent framework in gerontology known as Stack's core, or the scaffolding theory of aging and cognition.
Scaffolding?
Yeah. As primary aging causes certain neural pathways to become less efficient or degrade, a healthy older brain doesn't just accept the loss, it compensates.
No, it recruits alternative networks to bypass the damage, like putting up scaffolding around a building to bypass a collapsed staircase.
Exactly. An older adult might recruit regions in both hemispheres of their brain to complete a complex memory task, whereas the younger person might only rely on a single localized area. The older brain uses scaffolding to maintain performance.
That is incredible.
But the critical point is that you must supply the raw materials to build that scaffolding through constant cognitive stimulation throughout your life. Learning a new language, playing an instrument, engaging in complex social dynamics, these activities wire the backup networks.
Wait, I need to push back on the limits of this scaffolding theory.
Sure.
I understand the brain can reroute around damage, but doesn't that eventually run out? Like, you can't just build cognitive scaffolding forever if primary aging or a disease like Alzheimer's is relentlessly tearing the structural foundation of the building down, right?
That is a very vital distinction. Cognitive reserve does not cure or prevent the underlying pathology of diseases like Alzheimer's. The amyloid plaques and tau tangles still accumulate.
Okay.
However, an individual with a massive cognitive reserve can often tolerate a much higher level of that brain pathology before they ever show clinical symptoms of dementia.
Oh, because they have so many backup pathways built up, the disease has to destroy far more of the brain before it finally knocks out their functional ability.
Exactly. They maintain their independence and identity for years longer than someone with a low cognitive reserve who has the exact same amount of biological disease.
Wow. Okay. So physical activity protects the DNA, and mental puzzles build the neural scaffolding. I want to pivot to the emotional side of aging. Because culturally, we are just bombarded with the stereotype of the lonely, isolated, cranky older person. It frames aging as this inevitable slide into bitterness.
The psychological data robustly refutes that stereotype, though. Cross-cultural studies consistently demonstrate that older adults actually report experiencing less psychological distress, less frequent anger, and higher overall levels of well-being compared to younger adults.
But given all the physical challenges and the reality of losing peers, how does the brain actually pull that off?
It's driven by two interrelated psychological mechanisms.
Okay.
The first is the positivity effect. Neurologically, as people age, their amygdala, the brain region that processes emotion and threat, shows decreased activation in response to negative stimuli, while maintaining its response to positive stimuli.
Hey, really?
Yeah, older brains structurally begin to prioritize the encoding of positive memories over negative ones.
So they aren't just actively ignoring the bad stuff. Their brains are actually filtering the environment to hold on to the good stuff.
It is a profound adaptive shift in emotional regulation. And the second mechanism is the socio-emotional selectivity theory, which was formulated by researcher Laura Carstensen.
What's that about?
This theory revolves around our perception of time horizons. When you are 20, time feels expansive and infinite. Your primary motivation is gathering information and expanding your horizons, which means you tolerate a lot of superficial or stressful social interactions just to build a network.
But as you age, the runway gets shorter.
You realize time is finite, and because of that awareness, your goals shift from gathering information to optimizing emotional meaning.
Right.
Older adults actively prune their social networks. They intentionally drop relationships that cause anxiety or drain their energy, and they intensely invest in the close, meaningful relationships that provide emotional security.
The shrinking of a social circle in old age isn't a tragic story of abandonment. It's actually an intentional, proactive curation of joy.
Yes, it is the optimization of a limited resource time.
Which perfectly sets up the concept of the social portfolio, developed by psychiatrist Gene Cohen, which Pachana discusses in the source text.
Well, the portfolio analogy is brilliant.
It really is. In finance, you are taught never to put all your money into a single volatile stock. You diversify to protect against risk. Cohen argues you must apply that exact same financial logic to your emotional life.
Because if your sole investment in happiness and social connection is a weekly physical activity, say a local running club, a single knee injury suddenly bankrupts your entire emotional well-being.
You need emotional index funds. Cohen's social portfolio requires you to deliberately balance your investments across a grid. You need high-energy physical activities, sure, but you must also cultivate low-energy, mobility-independent activities like writing or birdwatching.
Right.
You need robust group activities, but you also need solo activities that bring you profound peace. And by diversifying this portfolio in your 40s and 50s, when the inevitable losses of older age occur, whether that is a loss of mobility, retirement from a career, or the passing of a friend, you are not left emotionally destitute. You have other robust investments to draw upon for resilience.
And we know that social isolation acts as a biological toxin. It increases inflammation and accelerates that secondary aging we discussed earlier. Maintaining a diversified social portfolio acts as an anchor for your cognitive and physical well-being.
So what does this all mean? For you listening, the overarching takeaway from this deep dive is deeply empowering. Aging is not a passive ride on a conveyor belt toward decline.
Definitely not.
The ancients intuitively understood it, and modern gerontology proves it down to the action of enzymes on your DNA. The daily choices you are making right now, whether that's embracing metabolic stress through diet, building neural scaffolding through continuous learning, or diversifying your social portfolio, are actively rewriting your biological invoice. You are deciding right now how much secondary aging you will permit into your life.
We are living through a unique demographic anomaly. The global shift to the population rectangle means that statistically you have a very high probability of reaching an advanced age.
Sure.
The overarching goal of human existence has shifted from merely surviving infectious disease to actively optimizing the architecture of those later decades.
Which leaves us with a really profound final thought to ponder.
What's that?
Well, if the human body has always possessed the underlying biological hardware to live into our 90s, just like Sophocles defending himself in an ancient court, and modern public health has finally cleared the path for the vast majority of us to reach that age, are we fundamentally changing what it means to be human? Or are we simply, for the very first time in history, giving everyone the privilege to read the final chapters of the natural human story?